She walked into that wedding hall with nothing but a torn photograph and a prayer. 25 years of searching. 25 years of questions no one would answer. And when she finally stood before him, when she finally looked into the eyes of the man she'd been told was her blood, he didn't embrace her. He didn't welcome her. His hand came down across her face so hard the music stopped. The drums went silent. 300 guests held their breath as she stumbled backward, that photograph floating to the ground between them like a leaf falling from a dying tree. But here's what made that moment unbearable. It wasn't the violence. It wasn't even the humiliation. It was the look in his eyes right before he struck her, a look that said he knew exactly who she was. This is the story of how one slap at a wedding exposed a lie that had poisoned 3 families for a generation. And I promise you, by the time you understand why he did it, you'll question everything you think you know about family, forgiveness, and the secrets we bury to protect the people we love. Daniel Carter was supposed to be one of the good ones. Everyone said so. The man who volunteered at homeless shelters every Saturday. The man who paid school fees for children whose parents couldn't afford them. The man whose patience was legendary, who'd never raised his voice in anger, let alone his hand. So when his palm connected with that young woman's cheek in front of everyone he knew, the question wasn't just why. The question was, who was he really? And who was she? This girl nobody recognized, standing there in clothes that had been washed so many times they'd faded to ghosts of their original colors, holding a photograph like it was a warrant for his arrest. Why did the bride, Angela Morrison, beautiful Angela who'd spent 18 months planning every detail of this day, why did she whisper those words right before she collapsed? Not again. Not today. What did she mean by again? What had happened before? And why did Daniel's mother, Eleanor Carter, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father disappeared when he was 3, why did she look at that photograph and start backing away like it was evidence of a crime she thought she'd gotten away with? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand what happened that day, you have to go back, way back, to 1998, to a small town called Riverside, Georgia, where Eleanor Carter was 22 years old and pregnant with a married man's child. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 41, successful, a deacon at the local church, and absolutely determined that no one would ever know what he'd done. Eleanor loved him, the way young women sometimes love older men who make them feel chosen, who make them feel like they're the exception to every rule. But when she told him about the baby, Marcus didn't choose her. He chose his reputation. He gave her $2,000 and an ultimatum. Handle it, or he would. Eleanor didn't handle it the way he wanted. She kept the baby. She moved 3 towns over, changed her name from Eleanor Webb to Eleanor Carter, and she raised Daniel alone, working double shifts as a nurse to give him everything Marcus never would. And she never, not once in 27 years, told Daniel the truth about his father. She let him believe Marcus had died before he was born. A car accident. Quick and painless and permanent. But here's what Eleanor didn't know. 2 years before Daniel was born, Marcus had another affair with a woman named Patricia Holmes, a housekeeper who worked in his office building. Patricia got pregnant too. But unlike Eleanor, Patricia didn't have $2,000 to start over somewhere else. She had the baby in a county hospital with no painkillers and no husband. And when the nurses asked for the father's name, she left it blank. She named her daughter Mira Holmes. And she raised her in a 1-room apartment on the east side of town, cleaning houses during the day and taking pills to sleep through the shame at night. When Mira was 4, Patricia died. Overdose. Accidental, the coroner said, though her mother, Mira's grandmother Ruth, never believed it. Ruth took Mira in. She was 73 years old, diabetic, barely surviving on Social Security. But she loved that little girl. And she told her the truth, the only piece of truth she had. Your father's name was Marcus Webb. You have a brother somewhere. His name is Daniel. Ruth kept half of a torn baby photograph, the only picture Patricia had ever taken of Mira as an infant. She tore it down the middle because she said one day, Mira would need to prove who she was. One day, when Ruth was gone, Mira would have to find her brother, and she'd need evidence. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter grew up good. Genuinely good, not the performance kind. He studied hard, got a scholarship to community college, became a youth counselor. He met Angela Morrison when they were both volunteering at a food bank in 2019. Angela had her own ghosts. She'd grown up in foster care after her parents died in a house fire when she was 7. She didn't talk about it much, but sometimes Daniel would wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by the window, staring out at nothing, her hands shaking. She had nightmares about smoke, about locked doors, about calling for help and no one coming. Daniel understood trauma. He didn't push. He just held her hand and waited until she was ready to come back to bed. They got engaged in 2023. Small proposal, nothing fancy. Just the two of them on the porch of the house they were saving up to buy. Angela cried. Happy tears, she said, but also relief. Relief that someone had finally chosen her. That someone was going to stay. The wedding was set for June 14th, 2025. A Saturday. Outdoor ceremony, 200 guests, a live band Angela's co-worker knew. Eleanor paid for most of it. She insisted. This was her son, her only child, and she wanted him to have everything Marcus never gave her. Everything except the truth. And then there was Mira, 19 years old in the spring of 2025. Still living with Ruth, who was now 98 and dying. Congestive heart failure. The doctor said she had weeks, maybe a month. Ruth held Myra's hand in that hospital bed, and she told her, Baby, you have to find him. You have to find Daniel. You're alone in this world, and you don't have to be. He's your blood. He deserves to know you exist. Mira didn't want to. She was terrified. What if he rejected her? What if he thought she wanted money? What if he didn't believe her? But Ruth squeezed her hand tighter and said, Take the photograph. Show him the photograph. He'll know. So when Ruth passed away on May 29th, 2025, Mira kept her promise. She started looking. She didn't have internet at home. She went to the public library. She searched Facebook, Instagram, county records. And finally, she found him. Daniel Carter. Youth counselor. Engaged. Wedding scheduled for June 14th at Riverside Community Park. 2 weeks away. Mira didn't know what to do. She couldn't afford a phone call. She didn't have his number anyway. She thought about writing a letter, but what if he didn't read it in time? What if he thought it was a scam? So she made a decision. She would go to the wedding. She would wait until the ceremony was over. And then, quietly, privately, she would show him the photograph and tell him the truth. She didn't want to ruin anything. She just wanted to meet her brother. June 14th, 2025. The day was perfect. 78 degrees. Light breeze. The kind of weather people pray for when they're getting married outdoors. Angela wore a dress her foster sister helped her pick out. Something simple, ivory with lace sleeves. Daniel wore a suit his mother bought him. Eleanor sat in the front row, beaming. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried when Angela walked down the aisle. Angela laughed when the pastor made a joke about Daniel always being late. They said their vows. They kissed. Everyone clapped. And then the reception started. Music, dancing, food. Joy everywhere. Except for one person. Mira stood at the very back of the crowd, near the parking lot, wearing the only dress she owned, a faded blue cotton thing she'd worn to Ruth's funeral 2 weeks earlier. She held the photograph in her hand, that torn baby picture, and she waited. She watched Daniel laugh with his friends. She watched Angela dance with her foster sister. She watched Eleanor hug guest after guest, her face glowing with pride. And Mira felt something crack inside her chest. Because she realized, standing there, that Daniel already had a family. A full one. A happy one. What was she about to do? Was she about to walk into the center of all that happiness and blow it apart? But then she thought about Ruth. About the promise she made. About the fact that she had no one left in the world. And somewhere in that crowd of strangers, she had a brother who didn't even know she existed. So she walked forward. Slowly. Her heart pounding so hard she thought people could hear it. She made her way through the dancing guests, past the tables, past the band, until she was standing at the edge of the dance floor, 10 feet from where Daniel was talking to one of his groomsmen. She called his name. Daniel. He didn't hear her. The music was loud. She called again, louder. Daniel. This time he turned. He looked at her, confused. She took a step closer and held up the photograph. She said, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt, but I need to show you something. Daniel walked toward her. Angela noticed and followed. Eleanor, from across the lawn, noticed too, and something in her face changed. Myra's hands were shaking as she held out the photograph. She said, My grandmother gave this to me before she died. She said you'd have the other half. She said you're my brother. Daniel took the photograph. He stared at it, and for 5 long seconds, no one moved. Then his face twisted. Not confusion. Not surprise. Something else. Something darker. Rage. He looked at Mira, and he said, "Where did you get this?" She said, "My grandmother. Ruth Holmes. Your father was Marcus Webb." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said, "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. Right now?" Myra's eyes filled with tears. She said, "Please. I just wanted to meet you. I don't want anything else." And that's when Daniel's hand came up. Fast. Hard. The slap echoed across the lawn. Mira stumbled backward and fell. The photograph slipped from her hand and landed in the grass. The music stopped. Someone screamed. Angela ran forward and dropped to her knees beside Mira, but Mira wasn't looking at her. She was looking up at Daniel, her cheek bright red, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. And Daniel was looking at the photograph on the ground. At that torn baby picture. At the proof. Eleanor Carter pushed through the crowd, her face pale, her hands trembling. She grabbed Daniel's arm and said, "We need to go. Now." But Angela stood up. She looked at Daniel and she said, "What just happened? Who is she?" And Daniel said, "No one. She's no one." But his voice cracked when he said it. And that's when Angela whispered, "Not again. Not today." And she collapsed. Chaos. Absolute chaos. 3 of Daniel's groomsmen carried Angela to a chair. Someone brought water. Someone else called for a doctor. Eleanor tried to pull Daniel away from the crowd, but he wouldn't move. He just stood there, staring at Mira, who was still on the ground, holding her face, sobbing. One of Angela's foster sisters helped Mira to her feet and took her to the parking lot, away from everyone. She sat her down on the curb and said, "Honey, what was that about?" Mira couldn't speak. She just cried. Back at the reception, the guests were whispering, staring, pulling out their phones. Daniel's best man, a guy named Marcus, ironically, tried to calm everyone down. He said, "Folks, there's been a misunderstanding. Let's give the family some privacy." But privacy was the last thing anyone wanted. This was the most dramatic thing anyone had seen at a wedding in years. Eleanor finally got Daniel alone, near the edge of the park, behind a grove of trees. She grabbed his face and said, "What were you thinking?" Daniel pulled away. He said, "She had the photograph, Mom. The one you said you burned." Eleanor's face went white. She said, "I did burn it." Daniel said, "Then how does she have it?" Eleanor didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. After a long silence, she said, "We need to leave. We'll deal with this later." But Daniel shook his head. He said, "I'm not leaving until you tell me the truth." "Who is she?" Eleanor looked at him, and for the first time in his life, Daniel saw his mother cry. She said, "She's your father's daughter." Daniel froze. He said, "What?" Eleanor wiped her eyes and said, "Your father had another child. Before you. I didn't know about her until you were 2 years old. Her mother came to me, demanded money, threatened to tell everyone. I gave her what I had and told her to disappear. I thought she did. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. He was walking back toward the parking lot, toward Mira. Angela, who had recovered enough to stand, saw him and followed. She said, "Daniel, stop. Talk to me." He didn't stop. He found Mira sitting on the curb, her face still red, her eyes swollen. He sat down next to her. He said, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have hit you." Mira didn't look at him. She said, "I didn't come here to ruin your life. I just wanted to know you." Daniel said, "How much of it do you know?" Mira said, "What?" Daniel said, "About our father. About Marcus Webb." Mira said, "Just his name. And that he didn't want me." Daniel laughed. A bitter, broken sound. He said, "He didn't want me either." Mira finally looked at him. She said, "What do you mean?" And that's when Daniel told her. Told her everything his mother had told him over the years. The story about Marcus dying in a car accident. Told her how he'd only learned the truth 6 months ago, when Eleanor got drunk at Christmas and accidentally let it slip. How Marcus was still alive. How he was living in Florida now, remarried, with 2 more kids. How he'd never once tried to contact Daniel. How Eleanor had been paying him to stay away. Myra's mouth fell open. She said, "He's alive?" Daniel nodded. He said, "And he knows about both of us. And he doesn't care." Mira started crying again. Not loud. Just tears streaming down her face. She said, "Why didn't you tell me that before you hit me?" Daniel said, "Because I'm a coward. Because seeing that photograph made me so angry I couldn't think straight. Because you reminded me of everything I've been trying to forget." They sat there in silence for a long time. Then Angela appeared. She stood in front of them, arms crossed, and said, "Someone better start explaining." Daniel looked up at Angela. He said, "Her name is Mira. She's my half-sister." Angela's face didn't change. She said, "I figured that part out. What I don't understand is why you hit her." Daniel opened his mouth, but before he could answer, Eleanor appeared. She walked up to them slowly, her face pale, her hands shaking. She said, "Because I told him to." Everyone froze. Angela said, "What?" Eleanor looked at Mira and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But when you showed up with that photograph, I panicked. I thought if Daniel acknowledged you, if he let you into his life, Marcus would find out. And if Marcus found out, he'd come after me for the money I took from him." Mira said, "What money?" Eleanor sat down on the curb, suddenly looking much older than her 49 years. She said, "When you were 4, your mother came to me. Patricia. She told me Marcus had gotten her pregnant too. She told me she needed money for you, for food, for rent. She threatened to go to his wife, to his church, to everyone. I gave her $5,000, everything I had saved, and I told her to leave town and never contact us again. But she didn't leave, did she?" Mira shook her head. She said, "She couldn't. She had nowhere to go." Eleanor nodded. She said, "And then she died. And I thought that was the end of it. I thought you'd been put into the system, adopted, moved away. I thought I'd never see you again. But here you are." Mira said, "My grandmother raised me. Patricia's mother. She told me the truth before she died. She told me to find Daniel." Eleanor closed her eyes. She said, "Ruth, I should have known. That woman never forgave me." Angela, who had been silent this whole time, said, "Wait. Back up. You paid off Myra's mother?" Eleanor nodded. Angela said, "With what? You were a single mom. You were barely making it. Where did you get $5,000? Eleanor didn't answer. Daniel said, "Mom, where did you get the money?" Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper when she said, "I stole it. From Marcus. The night I left him, I took money from his safe. Cash he'd been hiding from his wife. I used some of it to start over. The rest I gave to Patricia." Daniel stood up. He said, "You told me we survived on your nursing salary. You told me we made it on our own." Eleanor said, "We did. After the money ran out. After I paid Patricia." Daniel turned away from her. He looked at Mira and said, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it." But Mira wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at Eleanor. She said, "You gave my mother $5,000 and she still couldn't take care of me?" Eleanor nodded slowly. She said, "I think she used most of it to pay off debts. And the rest, I don't know. Maybe drugs." "I'm sorry." Myra's face crumpled. She said, "She died alone in that apartment. My grandmother told me she'd been sober for months. But the coroner said, she said it was pills." Eleanor didn't respond. And then Angela said something that made everyone freeze. She said, "It wasn't pills. It was shame." Everyone turned to look at her. Angela said, "I know because I lived it. Not exactly the same way, but close enough. My mother died in that fire because she couldn't face the people who judged her for getting pregnant at 16. She locked herself in that house because she thought we deserved it. Shame kills people. It killed my mother. It killed Myra's mother. And it almost killed all of us." She looked at Eleanor and said, "You've been carrying Marcus's shame for 27 years. You've been hiding and lying and paying people off because you thought that's what you had to do to protect Daniel. But look what it cost. Look at what it did to Mira. Look at what it's doing to you." Eleanor started crying. Deep, wrenching sobs. She said, "I didn't know what else to do." Angela knelt down in front of her and said, "You tell the truth. That's what you do. You stop hiding." And then she turned to Daniel and said, "And you stop being angry at the wrong people. Your father is the one who did this. Not your mother. Not Mira. Him." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said, "I know." Angela said, "Then act like it." He looked at Mira. He said, "I don't know how to fix this." Mira said, "You don't have to fix it. You just have to stop pretending I don't exist." And then she stood up, wiped her face, and said, "I'm going to leave now. I'm sorry I ruined your wedding." But before she could walk away, Angela grabbed her hand. She said, "You didn't ruin anything. You just told the truth. And the truth doesn't ruin things. Lies do." She looked at Daniel. She said, "We're not getting married today. Not like this. Not with all of this unfinished." Daniel said, "Angela, no?" She held up her hand. She said, "I love you. But I'm not going to marry you while you're still carrying all this anger and shame. We'll get married when you've dealt with it. When we've all dealt with it. Together." She looked at Eleanor. She said, "And that includes you." Then she looked at Mira. She said, "And you? Your family, whether anyone likes it or not, your family. 2 months later, August 2025, the four of them sat together in Eleanor's living room. Daniel, Angela, Mira, and Eleanor. It had taken time. Therapy. A lot of therapy. And some very difficult conversations. But they were trying. Daniel had reached out to Marcus. One email. Short and direct. It said, I know about Mira. I know you knew. I know you didn't care. You don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know that I'm not carrying your shame anymore. Marcus never responded. Daniel didn't expect him to. But sending that email lifted something off his chest he didn't even know was there. Eleanor had apologized to Mira. Really apologized. Not with excuses. Not with justifications. Just a plain, honest, I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for how I treated your mother. I'm sorry I made you feel like you didn't matter. Mira had cried. Eleanor had cried. And then Mira had said, I forgive you. Because holding on to it was killing me. And I've lost enough already. Angela had postponed the wedding. Not canceled. Postponed. She told Daniel, we'll get married when we're whole. Not before. And Daniel agreed. Because he realized she was right. You can't build a life with someone when you're still hiding from yourself. Mira had moved in with Eleanor. Temporarily. Just until she figured out her next steps. She'd started community college. Eleanor was helping her pay for it. Not out of guilt, though there was some of that. Out of love. The kind of love that shows up. That doesn't run. In August, on what would have been Ruth's 99th birthday, the four of them went to her grave. Mira brought flowers. Daniel brought a framed photo, the repaired photograph, both halves taped together. He placed it on the headstone and said, thank you for taking care of her. Thank you for making sure she found me. Eleanor said, I'm sorry I made you carry this alone. Angela said, you did good, Ruth. You did real good. And Mira, she just stood there crying. But this time, they weren't sad tears. They were grateful ones. 3 weeks later, Daniel and Angela got married. Small ceremony. Just close friends and family. Mira was there. She stood beside Angela as a bridesmaid. Eleanor walked Daniel down the aisle. And when the pastor asked if anyone objected, everyone held their breath for a second, then laughed. Nervous laughter. Relieved laughter. After the ceremony, Daniel gave a speech. He said, 6 months ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it meant the people who raised you. The people who stayed. But I was wrong. Family is the people who tell you the truth even when it hurts. The people who show up even when you push them away. The people who forgive you when you don't deserve it. He looked at Mira. He said, I'm sorry I hit you. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you didn't belong. You do. You always did. And I'm grateful you didn't give up on me. Mira smiled. A real smile. The first one anyone had seen from her. Daniel turned to Angela. He said, thank you for not letting me run from this. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see. That the only way forward was through. And then he turned to his mother. He said, I love you, Mom. I forgive you. And I release you from the burden you've been carrying. You don't have to protect me anymore. Eleanor broke down crying. Daniel walked over and hugged her. And then Mira joined them. And then Angela. And the four of them stood there, holding each other, while 200 guests wiped their eyes and tried not to sob. After the reception, as people were leaving, one of Daniel's friends came up to him and said, man, that was the most intense wedding I've ever been to. Daniel laughed. He said, yeah, but it was real. And his friend said, that's what made it beautiful. You didn't pretend. You didn't hide. You just told the truth and let people see it. Daniel nodded. He said, that's all any of us can do. Tell the truth. Face it. And hope that love is stronger than shame. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Mira sat on Eleanor's porch with a cup of tea. Eleanor came out and sat beside her. They didn't say anything for a long time. Then Eleanor said, do you think Ruth would be proud? Mira nodded. She said, yeah, I think she would. Eleanor said, I wish I could tell her I'm sorry. Mira said, I think she knows. Eleanor looked at her. She said, how do you do that? How do you forgive so easily? Mira said, it's not easy. But holding on to anger was killing me. And I figured if I survived losing everyone I loved, I could survive forgiving the people who hurt me. Eleanor reached over and took her hand. She said, you're stronger than I ever was. Mira squeezed her hand back. She said, no. I just learned from the strongest woman I ever knew. My grandmother taught me that the truth might hurt, but lies hurt worse. And family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up even when it's hard. Eleanor nodded. And they sat there together, in silence, watching the stars come out. So let me ask you something. If you were Mira, would you have gone to that wedding? Would you have walked into a room full of strangers and risked everything just to meet someone who didn't even know you existed? Or would you have stayed silent, kept the secret, lived your whole life wondering what if? And if you were Daniel, if someone showed up at the happiest moment of your life and shattered everything you thought you knew about your family, how would you have reacted? Would you have listened? Or would you have done exactly what he did? Here's the thing. We all carry secrets. We all carry shame. Things our parents did. Things we did. Things that happened to us that we never told anyone about. And we think if we just keep them buried deep enough, they'll disappear. But they don't disappear. They just grow. They poison everything they touch. Your relationships. Your peace. Your ability to trust. The only way to be free is to tell the truth. Not to hurt people. Not to destroy them. But to stop letting the lie control you. Mira didn't go to that wedding to ruin Daniel's life. She went because she was tired of living in the shadow of someone else's shame. And yeah, it was messy. It was painful. It was the hardest thing any of them ever went through. But look at what came out of it. A real family. Built on truth. Built on forgiveness. Built on the decision to stop running and start healing. That's the lesson. You never heal what you hide. You only heal what you're brave enough to face. So whatever you're carrying, whatever secret is weighing you down, ask yourself this. Is protecting it worth losing yourself? Is keeping it buried worth staying broken? Or is it time to do what Mira did? To walk into the room, to tell the truth, and to trust that the people who really love you will still be there when the dust settles. Let me know in the comments what you would have done. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that truth is always worth it, subscribe. Because we've got more stories like this. Real stories. Hard stories. Stories that will make you feel something. And in a world that's constantly trying to numb us, feeling something matters. Thanks for watching. And remember, the truth might break you open, but that's how the light gets in.